G'day everyone, my name's Dortimer, and in this video I'm going to show you how to build hypertube junctions, an essential part of any Awesome Hypertube network. In my last video I gave a brief demonstration of using the new priority power switch from Update 8 as a remote route switch. This allows you to control branches along a hypertube route to provide a reliable, controllable personal travel system between locations. We're going to do a deep dive tutorial in this video and show you how to build hypertube junctions and how to use priority power switches to control them. I've added chapter marks to each section in the description, so feel free to skip to specific sections if you want. If you haven't seen the previous video, I'll also link to that in the description below. I'll be building each junction variant on the Blueprint Designer. As well as letting me save each one for later replication, the grid base of the Blueprint Designer makes it easier to measure out and place hypertube supports, walls, and other items in specific places. We'll start with the basic junction and then work through to priority junctions and then to switch T-Junctions. Essential to any hypertube network is the junction, which allows a single hypertube to branch in different directions. The basic junction consists of 3 hypertube entrances arranged like this. The entrance to the junction is placed in the centre and the 2 exits are placed 4 meters forward and 2 meters either side of the centre. I'm placing hypertubes either side of the junction just to show how it is hooked up out in the field. We'll delete these before saving as a blueprint. On each of the 3 hypertube supports we add a hypertube entrance and connect them to power. Selecting a route at this junction requires you to be looking towards the intersection and then pressing left or right. The slight change in position one way or the other causes you to enter the hypertube entrance on that side. This basic junction works in Update 7 as there is no switching. You can use this junction right now to build your own hypertube network. You'll have to press left or right as you approach each junction, but you can use it to control which direction you will go within a hypertube network. Before Update 8, I used this junction in my own hypertube networks, which allowed me to get from one location to another, but it involved manually steering as you approach each junction. Let's test out the basic junction. Pressing left as you approach the junction will take you out the left exit, whereas pressing right as you approach the junction will take you out the right side. The return trip is much easier. Exiting out of either of the branches sucks you into the returning main branch. Now let's modify our junction to make one of the routes a priority route. We do this by shifting one of the entrances closer to the centre. The easiest way to do this is shift it in 1 metre. One of the entrances is 2 metres off centre and the other one is 1 metre. It doesn't matter how much you press left or right, this will always choose the junction that is closer to the centre. Here's a demonstration of this junction in action. As you see, no matter what I do, I always get pushed out the left-hand side. To make this useful, we can add a switch, and since Update 8, we can use a priority power switch. This allows us to switch that priority route on or off. When the priority route is off, the default route will be used. This exit, while further away from the centre, is the only one that is active, and therefore we will not get sucked into the inactive priority route. While you can move the priority route in a whole metre, it's not the most aesthetically pleasing one. For a more symmetrical finish, you can use pillars to place the switched entrance slightly less than 2 metres off centre. First we place one pillar off to the side, in line with the line that we want to move across. By holding Control, we can move this to anywhere up and down the pillar, as well as rotate it if we need to. So let's place it down the bottom so it's running along the surface along the line that we want to move our entrance. Now when we place the entrance, if we put it along the pillar allows us to move at any point along, so we don't need to put it in 1 metre increments. If we aim just below the pillar, we can see it snaps to the metre marks, but if we put it just above, we can slide it along the bottom. As you can see, it is just slightly closer to the centre than our default route. Even this small distance is enough to prioritise this route, even if we press left or right. Let's tidy this up a little bit for more general use by taking out the large chunky power pole and putting in a more discrete pole. For this, I'm just using a 3-meter metal beam we can then snap from here. There's a wall connector to there, which is a much smaller and neater power connector that's built into it. Then we've got a beam connector on top to give it a nice finish. Using the new priority power switch from Update 8, we can turn the priority route on and off from a remote switch. When the power is off, travel will continue through the always powered default branch. When the power is on, travel will always continue through the closer switch branch. In this way, you can leave a default branch to continue on and the switch branch to divert off to a factory or other stop. Let's test out our new priority switched junction. Starting with the switch off, you can see travel will always take the default route. Now let's turn the switch on for the priority route. As you can see, travel now always takes the priority route and not the default route, even though they look pretty close together. This is a nice bare bones blueprint that you can put wherever you want a priority junction. If you want something a little bit more fancy, you can now extend this and build an enclosure around this junction. Let's start by putting 4 walls. Next we add some hypertube holes to the walls on the outside. Then we need to add a very short amount of tube between the wall holes and the hypertube entrances. Next, I like to put on a roof at a slight angle, where the angle indicates which direction is the priority exit. Let's give this enclosed junction a quick test. I'm going to put down another priority power switch over here to simulate what our switch would be if we were leaving headquarters or leaving another factory. Using this remote control switch, we can then control whether the priority exit is on or off. Testing with it off, you can see the default route is still the route that is always taken. If we return from the other entrance, even though the switch is off, we still return successfully. Let's rename this switch so we know which one it represents. This is our remote control switch. We also have our unnamed switch, which is the switch inside the junction. I like to move these into priority groups to give some indication of their role. So as you can see, currently the switch is in a yellow state and our priority exit is powered down. Now coming to our remote switch, we can remotely turn on the switch and the priority route is now on. Now if we travel through the junction, we always take the priority route. This junction blueprint is for a left-hand exit. Let's modify it now to provide a right-hand one as well. First, we remove the priority entrance. This will be our new default entrance. Next, we delete the default entrance from the left-hand one. And using the pillar trick again, we build a priority right-hand entrance that is slightly closer to the center. So now in this model, our right-hand turn is the priority exit and our left-hand turn is the default. Let's also move the switch to the other side. Connect up the power to the new entrances. Now we have a functional right-hand blueprint. Let's just change the roof to angle the other way to give a visual indication that this is a right-hand junction rather than a left-hand junction. Now we can save this as a new blueprint, and we have both a left-hand version junction and a right-hand version. Next up, I'm going to show you how to build a T-Junction. One disadvantage of the standard junction is that only one line in one direction can be split into two outgoing directions. A more advanced junction can be used to set up a three-way T-Junction, where approaching from any of the three directions can branch to any of the other two directions. This can be done using the direction pressing selection method for update 7, or by using remote priority power switches from update 8. The T-junction looks a lot like three normal junctions combined together. The side junction is a plain unswitched junction. Typically this is used when you're just coming from a factory, so you can just press left or right to control whether you want to take one route or the other route as your exit. You could use a priority junction here, but that would involve another switch controlling the direction going the other way. If you want, you don't have to power both of the side entrances either, so you could have it so that it always takes you a specific direction. This allows you to approach the factory from either direction, but always has a default exit direction. For our main through line, we have two priority junctions controlled by a single smart switch. You might have noticed here we haven't used the pillar trick. Switching it to be 1 meter off center actually works better in this layout because it makes it a bit more compact, and it's all internal so you don't really see that it's not aligned. So our default through route is 2 meters off the center, whereas our priority route is 1 meter off the center to the other side. Connecting up power, we have 6 always on Hypertube entrances. We have 4 for the main through line and 2 for the return. As mentioned, you don't have to power both of the return ones if you don't want to. Then we can add our priority switch and connect the power for the remaining 3 junctions, which determine our priority route. This is the 2 priority junctions in the main through line, but also the junction on the side exit, since this junction doesn't need to be powered if nobody's coming out of the priority exits. When the switch is off, travel either way will always take the default route. By switching on the priority switch, the priority exits coming from both directions can now take you off to the side exit. Let's test it out. As you can see, by default, we just go through the default routes from top to bottom. Once again, we have our control switch and we have our junction switch. You can see off to the side there, when we turn the switch on and off remotely, it shows an indicator on the entrance there. With it off, you can see the priority routes are now turned off. With it on, you can see that all three entrances are now powered up. With the priority route turned on, every time we come in from either the top or the bottom, we always come out the side exit. Hopping in the side entrance, we can press left or right to choose whether to come out of the top exit or the bottom exit. Now let's tidy this up and make it a nice blueprint. First we'll get rid of the tall poles because we're going to enclose this in walls. Doing this on the blueprinter allows us to put the walls anywhere we want. Let's just go with the standard plain glass window. Now let's redo the wiring with wall-mounted power points. We connect all 6 entrances up to this first default wiring network. Then we can run a line to the power switch and connect the 3 priority entrances to the other side of the switch. Now let's add a roof. Again, let's put a bit of a slope on to indicate which direction the side is. You may have noticed I've not put an enclosure around the side entrance. This is just a personal style thing. I usually put a pillar or something underneath for it to rest on. I've tried putting a box around it, and you can put it within with angled walls to make it look pretty good, but I kind of like this rectangular look for the main junction. Let's try it out. Whoops, I forgot to put a wall power connector on the outside. Let's just quickly put that in there and then connect it to the main power. As you can see, by default, we just go through the default routes from top to bottom. Now we come to our control switch, and we can see our remote switch here. When we switch it on, we can see the light of the nearby entrance also turns on and off. Let's go into our priority power switch inside the junction. Let's give it a better name. Normally you'd give this a name to indicate which factory taking the side exit would take you to. Now when we look at the circuit break priority, we have a meaningful name for our priority switch. Turning it on, we can see all three priority entrances are now powered. When we travel through, whether we're coming from the top or the bottom, we always come out the side exit. We can come in through the middle and it'll take whatever route we press by pressing left or right. You may have noticed in the intro some other design variations. Some junctions shown had Hypertube split entrances angled to face the other entrance more directly. In Update 8, I have not noticed any performance or functional advantage in having them angled, but you might want to give them a go. To alter the junction to angle the entrances, we use the road barrier, which can be placed in any position and rotated in 15-degree increments. For the default entrance, place a road barrier where our Hypertube support would normally go, rotating it one notch to face the other entrance. Then switch to a wall, and by holding Control, the road barrier can be replaced by the wall, keeping the angle of the barrier. Add a Hypertube wall hole to the centre of the wall, and then delete the wall. Put a Hypertube entrance over the wall hole, and add in the small Hypertube to the outer wall hole. For the priority entrance, we combine the pillar trick with the road barrier. This time we can slide the road barrier anywhere along the pillar. Rotate the barrier one notch so it's facing the other entrance, aim just below the pillar to find the ground snapping point, and then move up and slightly inwards so that the barrier is slightly closer to the centre. Now hold Control again to replace the barrier with the wall and add the Hypertube wall hole. Add on the entrance and add the tube back in. You may need to change the tube mode to find a style that will fit in the tight angled space. Since we used holes instead of ground supports, the angled entrances are floating above the ground. If you want, you can add beams as a visual support. Reconnect the wiring and re-add the walls and roof, and the modified junction is done. Similar to the basic junction, the T-Junction can be modified to angle the entrances for the default route. You could also angle the side entrances if you wanted to. Place a road barrier rotated one turn for each of the entrances for the default route. Replace them with walls once again by holding Control to replace the barriers with walls. Add Hypertube wall holes, delete the walls, and add Hypertube entrances. Add the pipe between the entrances, selecting the pipe mode to get the curve you prefer. Also shown in the intro is a 5-way junction split. From my home hub, this junction splits off into 4 different directions, branching out to different areas of the map. The 5th route leads to my blueprint maker and vehicles parked down near the road. Note that this design was intended to only have a single entrance powered during initial use. If an entrance to one branch is left on and you return from a different branch, you may get drawn into the active branch instead of returning to the main branch. This is because of how close the entrances are to each other. Here's a view of this junction during its construction, showing how I built it. The middle entrance on the bottom is a standard hypertube support, with the two either side angled in using the road barrier and wall technique. I then extended beams from a central point at the front through to a wall behind to help align things. The top two entrances are hypertube supports placed on the higher angled beams. The main entrance is also on a beam, so it is slightly angled up towards the centre of the 5 branching entrances. So how do we use these remotely controlled junctions to go somewhere? Here's how I've arranged my junctions in the save that uses the 5-way split. I've grouped the 5 switches for this junction together to control which area I will branch out to. All the junctions which lead to specific factories I've named with a prefix for the area they are in, so that I know which area to select to go to a specific factory. For example, if I wanted to go to my plastics factory, the SP indicates that it is in the southern production zone, so I'd also need to turn on the southern production area route. To get to my warehouse, I need to turn on the eastern production route. To get to my heavy frames factory, I can select either northern production or eastern production. This is because the north and east routes both circle around and meet each other, making a circle route. The heavy frames factory uses a T-junction, so I can approach it from either direction. In a different save, the Hypertube network branches off to different zones along the one route. If no zone branch is selected, then the default route will travel along the coast and through the north. So if we wanted to go to the alumina works in the north, we wouldn't need to set a zone route. However, there is an alternate route. We can take the inland route instead of the coast route. The inland route defaults to circling back down the coast, so we also need to change that junction to go from the inland to the north. Now we can select any north route factory and we would travel via the inland route instead of up the coast. If we wanted to go to the turbo motors factory, which is inland, we would have to select the inland zone branch, otherwise we would be sent along the coast and bypass the inland area entirely. If we wanted to go to the plastics factory, by default we would go up the coast, but if we instead go through the inland route, it would join the coast route at the top and send us south, where we could branch off to the plastics. To get to the steelworks, we would need to select the south route. Let's head out to the battery farm via the inland route. This launcher is powered by stored power, so we turn on the launcher power for 10 seconds to charge it. After 10 seconds, we turn it off and we can jump in. I'll show you how to create launchers for a faster trip, along with how to use stored power in my next video. Pretty quickly, we arrive at the battery farm. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and it gave you some ideas on building your own hypertube junctions. I had originally planned to cover hypertube launchers for faster travel, plus options of power management, but this video ended up being much longer than planned. I'll cover these topics in a separate video in the near future. If you have any questions, comments or ideas, please let me know here on YouTube or via Reddit. Thanks again, and I hope to see you in the next video.